Be me. Daniel, 29, data analyst for a regional insurance company. My life was never exciting in the cinematic sense. I worked with numbers, lifted 3 times a week, cooked the same 5 meals, and kept my apartment clean enough that guests never had to pretend not to notice things. I liked order, not because I was rigid, because order gave me room to breathe. Then I met Elise. She was 27, worked in marketing, and had the kind of presence that made ordinary conversations feel charged. She was sharp, funny, intense in a way that made you feel chosen when her attention landed on you. We met at a friend's rooftop birthday party. I remember the lights strung above the patio, the smell of grilled food, the city humming below us like background static. She was arguing with some guy about movies, explaining how romantic comedies trained women to tolerate emotional neglect. The guy looked cornered. I should have taken notes. Instead, I laughed. She noticed. Then she turned that focus on me. For 2 hours, we talked about everything: work, family, books, why people lie on dating apps. She had opinions on all of it, strong opinions. But back then, they felt alive instead of hostile. She listened closely. She asked follow-up questions. She made me feel like my thoughts were worth examining. That is a dangerous feeling when it comes from a beautiful woman with bright eyes and absolute confidence. We started dating 2 weeks later. The beginning was unreal. She was affectionate, curious, playful. She would send me voice notes during lunch just to tell me something weird that happened at work. She would curl up against me on the couch and narrate the emotional failures of every character in whatever show we were watching. She told me she loved that I was calm. She said most men she dated were either emotionally chaotic or emotionally dead. I was apparently the rare third category: stable, present, safe. I believed her. For the first few months, I felt like I had found something rare: a relationship with chemistry and conversation, peace and intensity, someone who challenged me without trying to destroy me. Then the pattern started, small at first. So small I could explain it away without effort. If I said something she did not like, she would go quiet. Not normal quiet, not the kind where someone needs a minute. A curated silence, a silence with posture, a silence designed to be noticed. The first time we were deciding where to eat, she wanted this vegan fusion place downtown. I wanted Thai food from the place near my apartment. I said, "Can we do Thai tonight? I had a long day and don't really feel like driving across town." Her face changed, not dramatically, just enough. She said, "Interesting," then nothing. The rest of the car ride was silent. At dinner, she answered with one-word responses: "Fine, sure, whatever." When I asked if something was wrong, she said, "No, I'm just observing." I asked what she was observing. She said, "Your priorities." That was it. No explanation, no discussion, just that sentence sitting between us like a legal document. Later that night, she became warm again after I apologized. For what, I still do not know. Something about not considering how often women are expected to accommodate men's comfort. Something about my convenience being centered. I said I understood. She kissed me. The weather changed. That became the cycle: mistake, silence, confusion, apology, reward. At first I thought this was just how Elise handled conflict. Some people need space. Some people withdraw before they can talk. I told myself patience was maturity. I told myself not every silence was manipulation. That was generous of me. It was also wrong. Because her silences were never random, they were targeted. They arrived right after I disappointed her. They ended right after I corrected myself. They were not emotional pauses. They were punishments. She never had to say that. The timing said it for her. One Saturday, we were at a small dinner with her friends. Her best friend Tessa was there. Tessa had the kind of voice that made every sentence sound like a verdict. She was single, technically by choice, though every story she told about men ended with them choosing distance first. The conversation turned to relationships. Tessa said men only understand consequences. Elise laughed and said, "Exactly." Then she looked at me and squeezed my knee under the table. At the time, I thought it was affectionate. Later, I realized it was a warning label. Tessa asked me what I thought about women needing emotional space during conflict. I said space was healthy if it was communicated clearly. Elise's hand stopped moving on my knee. Tessa smiled, not kindly. She said, "Why do men always need women to communicate perfectly before they respect boundaries?" I said, "I don't think asking what happened is disrespecting a boundary." The table went cold. Elise stared into her wine glass. Tessa looked pleased, like a trap had closed. On the drive home, Elise said nothing. 23 minutes of silence. I know because I checked the route later. At her apartment, I asked if we could talk. She said, "I don't have the energy to educate you tonight." Then she went inside and closed the door. No hug, no goodnight, no explanation. The next morning, she texted me at 11:42, "I hope you've reflected." That was the whole message. I stared at it for a long time. Then I did what I had learned to do. I apologized. I said I was sorry if I had sounded dismissive. I said I respected her boundaries. I said I would try to be more aware. She replied with a heart emoji. Then she called me baby again. The case was closed, except cases like that do not close. They stack. After 6 months, I was walking around with a mental checklist of things that might trigger the silence. Disagreeing in front of her friends, taking too long to text back, not noticing a mood shift fast enough, asking what was wrong more than once, suggesting she might be overthinking something, choosing sleep when she wanted to process, using the word logical during any disagreement. That one was a landmine. She said men used logic to invalidate women's lived experiences. I started replacing normal words with safer ones. Maybe. I hear you. That's valid. I can see how it felt that way. It was not conversation anymore. It was compliance with better lighting. The silent treatments grew longer. At first they lasted an hour, then an evening, then a full day. The worst part was not the silence itself. It was the uncertainty. Was she done? Was she angry? Was I supposed to reach out? Was reaching out pressure? Was not reaching out abandonment? Every option had a hidden penalty. She had created a game where she controlled the rules by refusing to state them. And I kept playing because the old Elise still showed up sometimes, the laughing Elise, the soft Elise, the one who brought soup when I had a fever, the one who fell asleep with her head on my chest. Those moments were expensive. I paid for them in apologies I did not mean and anxiety I did not deserve. My friends noticed before I admitted it. My buddy Aaron asked why I kept checking my phone during a game night. I said Elise was upset. He asked what happened. I said I was not sure. He laughed once, then realized I was serious. He said, "Dude, how are you in trouble if you don't even know the charge?" That sentence stayed with me. How are you in trouble if you do not even know the charge? I started writing things down, not obsessively at first, just notes, date, trigger, duration of silence, how it ended. I work with data all day. Patterns are easier to face when they stop being feelings and become rows. January 8th, I declined brunch with Tessa because I had a migraine. Elise sent okay and did not speak for 19 hours. Ended after I apologized for not making more effort with her support system. January 17th, I said I preferred not to discuss our argument in front of her roommate. Silence for 31 hours. Ended after I said I understood that privacy can sometimes protect male accountability. January 29th, I fell asleep early after a 10-hour workday and missed her call. Silence for 26 hours. Ended after flowers, February 4th. I asked if she could tell me directly when she needed space. Silence for 44 hours. Ended after I admitted I had been making her responsible for managing my discomfort. Looking at the list made my stomach turn. Not because the incidents were dramatic, because they were small, petty, ordinary, the kind of things healthy couples handle in 5 minutes. She had turned each one into an emotional hostage negotiation. Then came Valentine's Day. I planned dinner at a place she had mentioned twice. I bought tickets to a small jazz show afterward. I even got her a first edition of a poetry collection she loved. I was proud of that one. The evening started well. She looked beautiful. She laughed easily. For 3 hours, I felt like we were back in the beginning. Then my phone buzzed during dessert. It was my sister. She had been having a rough time after her divorce. I glanced at the message. It said, "Can you talk tomorrow? Bad day, but I'm okay." I typed, "Of course. Call me in the morning." That took maybe 15 seconds. When I looked up, Elise was watching me. The temperature had dropped. I said, "Everything okay?" She smiled without warmth. She said, "It's fine." There it was, the word fine, the funeral bell of the evening. At the jazz show, she sat beside me like a marble statue. In the Uber home, she looked out the window. At my apartment, she said she was tired and wanted to go home. I asked what happened. She said, "I just think it's interesting that even on Valentine's Day, women are expected to compete for male attention." I explained it was my sister. She said that made it worse because now I was using family obligation to avoid accountability. I stared at her, actually stared. Something in me was too tired to rearrange itself around the accusation. I said, "Elise, she was upset and asked to talk tomorrow." Elise picked up her coat. She said, "I can't have this conversation while you're being defensive." Then she left. The silence lasted 3 days, 3 full days. No calls, no texts, no response to my one message asking if she got home safe. By day 2, I felt sick. By day 3, something changed. The anxiety burned itself out. There is a point where panic cannot keep feeding itself. The body gets bored of danger when danger becomes routine. I made dinner, I watched a movie, I slept 8 hours. On the morning of day 4, she texted, "I needed space after how you treated me." Old Daniel would have replied immediately, a paragraph, an apology, a request to talk, a confession shaped around her feelings. New Daniel looked at the message, put the phone face down, and finished my coffee. I replied 2 hours later, "Understood." That was all. She replied almost instantly, "Understood." I wrote, "Yes." Then I went to work. That was the first time I enjoyed the silence. Not maliciously, not triumphantly. I simply noticed that without her active disapproval filling the room, my life was quiet in a way I had missed. I got more done that day than I had in weeks. No checking my phone every 10 minutes. No crafting perfect sentences. No emotional weather monitoring. Just work, numbers, coffee, clean problems. That evening I went to the gym. Then I cooked salmon and rice. Then I played guitar badly for 40 minutes. My phone stayed on the kitchen counter. Elise did not call. I did not chase. The next day she sent a long text. It said she was disappointed by my lack of emotional initiative. It said silence should be a space for reflection, not avoidance. It said she needed to know I was taking accountability. I read it once, then I added it to my notes. February 18th. Elise initiated silence after Valentine's Day conflict. When I did not pursue, reframe my compliance as avoidance, I did not send that to her. I simply wrote back. "I respected your need for space." She did not like that. She said I was being cold. I said, "I'm giving you what you asked for." She said, "That's manipulative." I said, "Okay." She called me within 30 seconds. I let it ring. Not because I wanted to punish her, because I was in the middle of eating dinner and my food was hot. That sounds small. It was not small. For months, her moods had outranked my meals, my sleep, my plans, my peace. That night, I let the rice stay warm. I called her back after dinner. Her voice was sharp. She asked why I ignored her call. I said I was eating. There was a pause. She said, "Wow." I said nothing. She said, "So this is who you are now?" I said, "Someone who eats dinner before returning a non-emergency call?" She accused me of mocking her. I was not mocking her. I was clarifying the scale of the event. She hung up. Then came another silence. This one lasted 4 days. Those 4 days were the best week I had had in months. I know 4 days is not a week. Emotionally, it felt like one. I cleaned my apartment. I met Aaron for burgers. I watched a whole movie without pausing to answer a text about tone. I slept like a man who had set down a heavy bag he forgot he was carrying. By day 3, I caught myself hoping she would stay silent a little longer. That was the real turning point. Not the fight, not the accusation, the hope. I hoped my girlfriend would not contact me. That is when you know the relationship is already dead. You are just waiting for the paperwork to match the body. When Elise finally reached out, she sent, "Are you seriously okay with us not talking?" I replied, "It's been peaceful." That was honest. It was also the worst thing I could have said if my goal was maintaining the old dynamic. Fortunately, that was no longer my goal. She called immediately. This time I answered. She was crying, or close to crying. She asked how I could say that. She asked if I even missed her. I sat at my desk looking at the spreadsheet of silence episodes. I said, "At first, yes." She went quiet, a different quiet this time, not tactical, unsteady. She said, "At first?" I said, "Yes." She asked what that meant. I said, "It means the first day is hard, then the second day is easier. By the third day, I usually feel calmer than I did before." She said, "So you're saying you're happier when I don't talk to you?" I considered softening it, then I decided not to. I said, "Recently, yes." She made it sound like I had physically hit her. I did not enjoy it. But I also did not take responsibility for protecting her from the result of her own method. She whispered, "That's cruel." I said, "No, Elise. Cruel is using silence to make someone afraid. Peaceful is what happens when they stop being afraid." She hung up again. This silence lasted only 12 hours. Progress, if you wanted to call it that. The next morning, she appeared at my apartment without texting first. I opened the door and found her standing there in leggings, oversized sweater, hair pulled back, eyes red. A year earlier, that sight would have dissolved me. I would have pulled her inside. I would have apologized before knowing the accusation. Now I just stepped aside and said, "Come in." She looked around my apartment. It was cleaner than usual. Plants watered, laundry folded, guitar on the stand, books stacked neatly on the coffee table, evidence of a life functioning beautifully in her absence. That seemed to upset her more than any insult could have. She sat on the couch. I took the chair across from her, not beside her, across. She noticed. She said, "So now we're having a business meeting?" I said, "I think clarity would help." She rolled her eyes, but there was fear under it. She said she felt abandoned. She said I had changed. She said the man she fell in love with would have fought for her. I said, "The man you fell in love with kept chasing because you trained him to panic when you disappeared." Her face hardened. She said, "I didn't train you." I opened my laptop. That was not planned for drama. The spreadsheet was already there because I had been updating it the night before. I turned it toward her, rows, dates, triggers, duration, resolution cost, apology, flowers, dinner, emotional concession. Silence ended. She stared at it. Her mouth opened slightly. I said, "This is the last 8 months." She said, "You made a spreadsheet about me?" I said, "I made a spreadsheet about a pattern." She said that was insane. I said, "Maybe." Then I scrolled. January, February, March. I showed her the average duration of silence, 29 hours. I showed her the longest period, 4 days. I showed her how often the silence ended only after I apologized first, 86%. I showed her the column labeled "Issue Resolved." Almost every entry said no, because nothing was ever resolved. The silence did not solve problems. It trained behavior. She looked away. For once, she had no language ready. I said, "You call it needing space. Maybe sometimes it started that way. But this is not space anymore. This is punishment." She shook her head. Tears started building. She said, "I was protecting my nervous system." I nodded. "Then I protected mine." That landed. I could see it land. She had no defense against symmetry. She said, "By ignoring me?" I said, "By not chasing you through a door you closed." The room went still. Outside, someone was mowing a lawn, a normal Saturday sound. The kind of sound you hear when your life is not being managed by someone else's moods. Elise wiped her face. She said, "I never wanted you to stop caring." I said, "I know." That was the problem. She wanted the chase, the proof, the panic. She wanted silence to hurt me enough that I would come back softer, smaller, easier to manage. She never wanted me to find anything inside it, especially not peace. For 2 weeks after that, she tried to change. She really did. She used words instead of silence, clumsy words, sometimes angry words, but words. She would say, "I need an hour before we talk." I would say, "Okay." Then she would actually come back in an hour. At first, I thought maybe we had turned a corner. Then I realized I was watching her behavior the way you watch a dog after it bites someone, hopeful but ready. That is not love. That is risk assessment. The old warmth did not return, not because she did not try, because my body no longer believed it. When she touched my arm, I remembered the car rides. When she said she missed me, I remembered the unread messages. When she said she wanted connection, I remembered how connection had been made conditional on my obedience. Trust is not a switch, it is a ledger, and her account was overdrawn. The final incident happened at her friend's birthday dinner. Tessa was there, of course. There was wine, there were candles. There were 12 people at a long table pretending not to listen to each other's conversations. Someone asked how Elise and I were doing. Elise stiffened. I said, "We're working through some things. Neutral, fair, apparently not good enough." Tessa leaned in and said, "Working through things usually means the woman is doing all the emotional labor." A few people laughed. Elise did not correct her. She looked down at her plate. That old familiar chill moved into the air. I waited. Maybe she would say something. Maybe she would defend the last 2 weeks of effort. Maybe she would choose the relationship over the performance. She did not. Tessa looked at me and said, "Daniel, are you doing the work?" I took a sip of water. Then I said, "Actually, I stopped responding to silent treatments and discovered my life became more peaceful." The table went silent, real silence, not punishment, shock. Elise's face went pale. Tessa blinked like a computer freezing. I did not raise my voice. I did not smirk. I simply stated the fact. Tessa said, "Wow, that's abusive." I nodded once. "That's an interesting interpretation." Then I turned to Elise. "Do you want to leave, or would you rather stay?" Her eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "How could you embarrass me like that?" I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because after everything, embarrassment was the first pain she recognized as real. I said, "I gave a factual answer to a public question." She stood up and walked out. The old script demanded that I follow. The chair scraping, the hurried apology to the table, the pursuit down the sidewalk, the pleading, the panic. I stayed seated. I finished my water. Then I looked at Tessa and said, "You can have the rest of my appetizer." I paid my half of the bill at the front and went home alone. Elise did not call that night. She did not text the next day. On day 2, Aaron came over and we watched a game. On day 3, I went hiking. On day 4, I updated the spreadsheet for the final time. Trigger, public challenge by Tessa. Elise response, silence. My response, no pursuit. Outcome, pending. Then I closed the laptop. I did not care about the outcome anymore. That was when I knew. The pending result no longer had power. On day 5, Elise came over. This time she looked different, not angry, not righteous, scared. She asked if we could talk. I said yes. She stood in my living room and said the silence had gotten out of control. She said she had used it because she was afraid of being dismissed. She said Tessa had encouraged her to never reward male defensiveness with immediate access. She said she thought if I loved her, I would fight through it. I listened. Then I asked, "Fight through what?" She stared at me. I said, "Your punishment?" She started crying. She said, "I didn't think of it that way." I said, "I did." She said, "Can we start over?" That question was so simple, so young, like the last 8 months were a board game we could put back in the box. I looked around my apartment, the quiet room, the folded blanket, the guitar, the little life I had rediscovered in the spaces where she refused to speak. I said, "No." Her mouth trembled. She said, "You don't love me anymore?" I answered carefully, "I loved you for a long time." She heard the past tense. People always hear the past tense. She sat down like her legs had stopped working. For once, there was no accusation, no feminist framework, no therapy phrase, no nervous system language. Just a woman realizing that the tool she used to create fear had created distance instead. Permanent distance. I sat across from her, same chair as before. She said, "I thought silence would make you understand how serious things were." I said, "It did." She looked up. I continued. "It made me understand that peace without you felt better than anxiety with you." That was the sentence that broke her. Not loudly, not theatrically. She just folded in on herself and cried into her hands. I felt sad for her. A little. But not enough to change my answer. Pity is not a relationship. Guilt is not love. And exhaustion is not commitment. I told her I wanted to end things. She asked if there was someone else. There was not. That confused her more than if there had been. She needed another woman to explain my leaving, a rival, a temptation, a betrayal, something easier than the truth. I said, "There is no one else. I just like my life better when I'm not afraid of your absence." She nodded slowly. That one she understood. Maybe because it was too plain to reinterpret. She left after an hour. No slammed door, no final insult. Just a quiet goodbye in the hallway. For the first time, her silence was not a weapon. It was simply the sound of someone leaving. I thought I would feel devastated. I did not. I felt tired, then relieved, then very, very calm. Over the next few weeks, she sent a few messages, apologies, memories, a photo from our first trip together, a long paragraph about how she had confused boundaries with control. I believed some of it, maybe even most of it. But belief did not create desire. Understanding the fire does not rebuild the house. I replied once. I said, "I hope you learn to speak before people stop listening." Then I blocked her for a while, not as punishment, as peacekeeping. Aaron asked if I was okay. I said yes. He said, "You seem lighter." I said, "I sleep better." That was the whole obituary of the relationship. I sleep better. Months later, I saw Elise at a grocery store. She was by the produce section holding a bag of lemons. We saw each other at the same time. For a second, the old reflex moved in me. Analyze her face, check the temperature, prepare the apology. Then it passed. She gave a small wave. I nodded. She looked like she wanted to say something. Maybe she wanted closure. Maybe she wanted proof that she still mattered. Maybe she wanted one more conversation where silence could frame the room. I smiled politely and kept walking. Not cruelly, not dramatically, just walking. Because the best part of peace is how little explanation it requires. I learned something from Elise, not what she wanted to teach me. She thought silence was power. She thought distance was discipline. She thought if she disappeared long enough, I would become whatever version of myself she preferred. Instead, she gave me practice living without her. Hour by hour, day by day, punishment by punishment. She trained me to associate her absence with relief. Then she broke when I started enjoying the lesson. The funny thing about silent treatment is that it only works on someone desperate to hear your voice. Once that desperation dies, the silence changes shape. It stops being a cage, it becomes a room. Then one day you look around that room and realize it has windows, clean air, and a door that opens from the inside. Elise wanted me to chase her through every silence. I stopped. She wanted me to panic every time she disappeared. I rested. She wanted absence to prove her value. It proved the opposite. And by the time she finally decided to speak, I had already fallen in love with the quiet.